Welcome. This is the podcast series dedicated to living a revenue culture. One of the things we learned from the pandemic, it reminded us how important the people are in our lives. And for those of us who are entrepreneurs or business owners or managers or employees, it also reminded us that it's about the people in the organization that actually make a corporation successful. And in revenue science, we've known for quite a while that you'll never maximize profits unless you first optimize people. So twice a month, we bring you people out there in the real world working on this. And today we have Tom Gay with us. And Tom and I have crossed paths over the last, 15 or 20 years, multiple times. And most recently, through one of my clients, TTI Success Insights, who Tom also was part of their organization for a while. And he brought us one of his new software tools, and I'm still trying to figure out how to apply. I haven't been able to get us coalesced around it yet, but I'm still working on it. And so I'm going to ask him to share his background today. And he's had multiple companies, software industry, and coaching, and he was part of the Tab World, which is a CEO organization. And I just want him to share some of his experiences with you today. So, Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Rick. It's a pleasure to be joining you here in this frame and seeing how we can make some rain together, as I say.
That's exactly what it's all about. And it's make rain and make the world a little better place at the same time.
Totally agree.
So if you kind of give us your background and how you got to where you are, and I definitely want you to talk about two things as part of this. One is EngagePro, and the other is, when I look at your LinkedIn profile, I keep seeing the 6-step sales ladder. So I want you to tell me what that is before we get done today.
Okay. Well, good. You just guide me towards what you want me to disclose. I'll be an open book for you.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, yeah, as you know, I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I've always blended technology with marketing. And the old-fashioned way we used to describe it is when you find a problem that more than one person has, you've got the opportunity to build a system to solve it. And that's, if there's enough people with that problem, that system begins to have a market. And from there, you can assess whether or not you've really got enough for a business. And my first company that we started in 1979, we sold in 1989, sold it to Equifax. And what we solved was the problem of, how does someone who opens a new retail or restaurant establishment know before they buy the land that it's going to be a successful location? And we turned that into a mathematical modeling tool that was used by hundreds and hundreds of leading firms globally. And as a result, we could tell whether or not you were going to buy a Lexus and whether the family down the street were going to buy Pampers versus Huggies diapers for their children. All of that was mathematically projectable, and the firms who made those kinds of products came to us to solve everything from store location to distribution profiles, and that whole problem focused system build application has turned into today 7 different companies for me. My second company, we ended up solving the problem of what could possibly affect the value of your property that you could find out before you owned the property in the way of risk activities, earthquake, flood, fire, environmental, and took that company public. And then sold that, and then took over a company that trained real estate professionals how to get more referred clients. And again, there's a systematic way to get more clients. And I took that and turned it into my own consulting practice because I understood the principles of relationship marketing.
Yep.
And went from going to a new market where I knew no business person at all. And in 18 months, I had 30 clients who were paying me roughly $800 a month, a CEO board. And it just keeps going like this, Rick. I turned that into a software company because I could teach the process by having a little software tool. And that turned into close to 5 million subscribers called refer.com. And I'm too active and too excited about getting up each day and having an impact on people and changing lives that I started another company. I like yourself. I don't know if the word retirement's in your vocabulary, but it's not in mine.
No.
There's just too much good to do.
Yep.
To leave everything lie fallow. I want to get out there and make an impact while I can still move and be with lots of people who are committed to making an impact and building companies and building cultures. And so that's where I'm working today in my current business.
And I'm gonna make sure we do talk about EngagePro in a minute, but as I was listening to your story, couple of things, because you were very clear about wanting to make a difference, and I think when people initially hear that, the first thing they think about, and I'm sure this is true, you want to make a difference in your client's world. But how about, because you and I have talked before, and you've talked about the people that have worked for you, share a little, because, when you have that many successes, I'm sure there had to be some people who were part of that along with you.
Well, interesting. Yes, absolutely. I adopted a principle back 40 years ago where I took our traditional organizational chart and I flipped it upside down. Now, more people talk about that today than when I did it. But I flipped it upside down and I said, if I'm going to be doing my job properly, I'm going to be at not the top of the pyramid, but at the bottom of the organizational chart, serving my leaders. And my leaders are going to serve their teams. And their teams are going to do their jobs and serve our clients. And then the clients are going to get the benefit. And that became a paradigm we lived by. And I'll give you a little anecdote. That company grew to, my first one, to about 350 team members. 25 years after the sale, the team organized its first reunion, and there were 175 people flying in from around the world for that reunion. Now, about 175 people participated in the financial rewards from the sale of the business because we made sure everyone was a stakeholder. The second reunion is happening in a month here in Southern California, organized again by these people whose lives were formed, business lives were formed by the principles of servant leadership.
That's a spectacular story. And, you told it to me before. I wanted to make sure other people heard that, because that's not how a lot of organizations think, either the pyramid turned upside down or the relationships that you must have formed with those people over that period of time for them to want to come back to a reunion.
Well, it is. And as important as that is, I had lots of mentors in my life. And I realize I've been that to a lot of people. But the thing that I find most exciting is the impact that overall team of people is having in their decades since we were together. There's been some amazing world-leading companies that have emerged from that core group of people. So the multiplier effect goes way beyond anything you can imagine.
Now, Tom, tell me, clearly there was a personal commitment of them to you and you to them and them to each other. Did you have a purpose that, kind of drove them, or how did you get the people pulled together?
Well, there's one glaring reality. People are watching every move you make as the leader. And if you say one thing and do something even minutely different, it's not long before the whole system knows it. So you have to walk the walk consistently in everything you do. Now, there's been a lot of principles about, management by walking around and all those kinds of things. Those are just mechanics. The mechanics is, do you really care? I'd like to think that we had some original thoughts, but we had a lot of people go before us that we could follow, we could learn from, and without dwelling too much on it, my first professional business life mentor handed me a 4 or 5 page article on the day I went to work for him. And it was an article published in the 1950s out of Harvard Business Review called The Pygmalion Effect. And what it described, I know you're familiar with it,
Yep.
is people will rise to the level that you let them and anticipate they can rise to.
Yep.
And he gave that to me and said, this is the way we're going to operate. And that has stayed with me. I still have the article, stayed with me forever. People will rise to your expectations. If you set them low, you're going to get that.
Yep.
Raise the expectations, get out of the way, and then bring them together. Communicate relentlessly. And if you bring those things, people will never get more than one day out of step from where you want to go if you talk to them every day.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
that's been, my classic operating tool is the 15-minute stand-up meeting.
Yep.
No chairs. We don't have time to sit down. And we only got 15 minutes. So everybody tell everybody where you are, what's going on, what you need to make your plan happen for today or for this week or whatever.
There's about 6 books that have been written since you started and sold that company on all those things you just talked about.
Yeah, it always kind of ticked me off that they beat me to the book marketplace, but it's okay. I was doing other stuff. We had fun nevertheless.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting your focus on transparency in that period in time, because one of the, as we bring people to the podcast and we do the research that we can do on revenue culture today, 2 or 3 things jump out. One is, and you described it from a number of years ago, transparency, that you better say and do things that align, because if you don't, the world's going to know. Well, today everything's so incredibly transparent and almost instantly transparent, and it's not just in your building, it's around the world, that we have people who think like some people think as you did before, but they're doing it because they don't have a choice. The reality is it is transparent.
Yeah, there's very few hiding places anymore.
Yeah. And so, and the other one that's really interesting, obviously this podcast is about living a revenue culture. And, today, finally, organizations are, I grew up in the, when I went to work, my first job was in the mid 60s, and I worked for Pontiac Motors. And I mean, we were, the way I would describe it today, we were a temporary replacement until the robot showed up.
Yeah.
And, now finally we're starting to break that thinking that people are interchangeable parts until the robot replaces them and we don't need the people anymore. And the fact that we have a shortage of workers and even a bigger shortage of the right trained workers, and the workers have the ability to decide they don't want to work for us and they'll have another job shortly. And so all of a sudden, leadership is saying, maybe I better pay attention to those people because they really do make a difference in what my outcomes are going to be.
Oh, I am in total agreement with you. I just wrote let's call it a white paper. It'll become a chapter in a book talking about how it's time for a great relationship reset in business. And I put the great relationship reset out there to compete with, economic reset, job reset, whatever else is spoken of in terms of reset. But leaders need to come back to the place where they reset the relationships with their teams, their people. They need to turn them into teams. And that will change the cost of recruiting, improve the retention, reduce the turnover, increase productivity, drive more revenue, lower costs when they're all joined together because they want to be joined together. It's not because you're a magical, creator of a tapestry. The people create the tapestry if you give them the material to work with.
Amen. In the last 3 or so years, this is research conducted by me and all the books I've read. One of the things that just seems to be really, really important is, how do I get my team unified? We talk about alignment, and I think alignment's one of those terms we stole from either software development or manufacturing, where we align lines of code or we align machines. And so we bring it to business and we say, well, let's get all our people aligned. And my observation is, if your people aren't unified to the purpose, to the mission, to why we're here, they will never be aligned because they'll all have such diverse ideas and they're not working hard, they're not smart. They just aren't all unified to the same purpose or the same reason to get up in the morning and come to work. And I hope we start to figure out how to, help people work places where they feel unified. They get excited about going to work, and they get excited about who they get to work with and the things they get to do. And then they'll align themselves, and I think that's your upside down pyramid thing,
It is. I think there is getting alignment is easy if you start in the right place. And the starting in the right place is, yes, you've got to have vision, mission, values, goals, strategies, and action plans. I get all that. However, the people who are going to be building those plans, if you will, and whatever the product is, have to know, like, and trust each other first.
Yep.
And getting to know. I mean, this is the first activity in addressing the 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Yes.
Is get your people to know each other.
Yep.
Who they are, what they stand for, what their purpose is, what their passion is, what their family is. When you get that personalization, you suddenly get that mutual dependency that allows them to be part of a team. And I use the analogy of a football team. Every player on the field is an individual and has an assignment, but that doesn't mean they're a team when they go on the field.
Right.
Until they learn how they can trust each other to be in the spot they're supposed to be in at the point in time, let's say when the ball arrives or the runner arrives or the defender has to show up. That's what team is all about. And you've struck one of my passions, so I love it.
Yeah. In our work for years, we've always measured a thing we call the cost of the chaos to produce revenue. And the cost of chaos in a B2B world is between 20 and 40% of gross sales. And people say, well, where does it come from? And one of the biggest costs of chaos is a result of all these silos where all the people stay in their little silo and they live to their silos KPIs, and they never get to know anybody in any of the other silos. And heaven help them if they had to know a customer. And so consequently, they do what somebody told them to do very well. It's just it's not aligned to the whole organization or to the value you transfer to customers.
I totally understand. Yes, totally understand. And that's the challenge and the opportunity. Yeah, it's a challenge. So you can look at a condition and say, is that a problem? Or is that a place we could go to really get better or get the revenue going or whatever it is that your objective is?
Well, and it's interesting when the people are excited about that challenge, it's amazing what they can go create.
Oh, yes. I'll give you a little story. Back about 1985, we had a new client coming in the door. It's a pretty large company by the name of Procter and Gamble.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah. What they did is they hired us conditioned on one thing. Now, there's a lot of conditions, but one thing as a requirement. And that is I had to send my team to Cincinnati, who would be working for them. And they would put their team and my team together in about a 2-week total quality management training program coming out of the Deming system.
Yep.
Now, I know you know that, but when my team's spending 10 days or so with their team, all of a sudden, the sum of the parts is greater than the count of the people involved. The whole was bigger than the sum of the parts. And that went on to a lot of good accomplishments.
And it is, I'm listening to that experience. It makes me reflect on the fact that when I get to know you, and now I actually have faith that I can trust you, and that together we do make more than the sum of our parts. And
Yep.
It's hard to get that faith without that knowledge and that trust.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And we're in a world today where so much of what we hear and do has tried to be a substitute for that trust. You will never find a sales funnel or a piece of AI or a automation replicating the power that person-to-person trust will create. Use the tools. I use them all.
Yeah.
But if you want to turn that into results, get the people active in the process.
Well, I've got a friend, a business associate that he has a global networking business, and he's got some really cool people that he puts together. And when you sit down with him, he is so passionate about his is a human to human networking environment. It's not bot to bot, and it's not AI resume matched to AI job created thing, but it's how people to people actually network in 2023 to learn about each other and improve their lives and their businesses. And it sounds like this is a very similar conversation.
Yeah, it totally is. Totally is. Yes.
It was up until fairly recently, until ChatGPT became as prevalent, and it's getting more and more prevalent. When I would look at somebody's LinkedIn profile where they wrote it themselves and they used their own words, if you really care, you can read it and get some look into who they are, so that when you talk to them, you feel like you know something about them before you've ever sat down. Now, every time I look at whether it's a resume or a LinkedIn profile, I'm wondering, did ChatGPT create it? And, or is it still the human?
Yeah. Well, we'll be asking that question a lot, I'm sure, as the months and years unfold. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I do want you to share a little bit about EngagePro, and I'm going to set up why I care about it, and then I'd love to have you probably correct anything I didn't get right about it, but tell people more. And that is, when you showed it to me, I saw exactly you had taken the process that I have used, and I've seen other people who've been very successful in relationship selling. And often that tends to be significant type sales, enterprise type business development. And you took what we struggle with, because it's hard. I mean, it's easy to say, I'm going to learn who the person is across from me, and then I'm going to pass value to them for things I know they care about, that helps build a stronger relationship between them and me. And I'm going to do that intentionally and systemically and over time. But you put together a model that, if your intent is to transfer that kind of value to people and build those kinds of relationships, you figured out a way to make that much easier than it used to be.
Well, in fact, it is easy. If you are willing to focus on the relationship, like we've been speaking of, the EngagePro process will open up the doors to the opportunities you're looking to create. For the most part, it's increased sales, easier client acquisition, more referrals, speaking platforms, a whole host of endpoints you can get to, more donors.
Yep.
I've brought EngagePro into the nonprofit world, and people have gone from having 60 major donors to 300 major donors in the course of 2 years by focusing on the people and the relationship. So what EngagePro does, and I've taught this process to hundreds and hundreds of coaches and consultants, branded, well-recognized firms. What EngagePro does is say, if I bring, say, Rick McParton into my EngagePro tool, and I put him in as a contact, and I begin to learn what Rick really is all about, what he likes, where he goes on vacation, his hobbies, the books he's reading, his family circumstances. EngagePro is a place where you build a repository of that information, and it automates in milliseconds finding information about Rick's interests, giving it back to me so that I can use it to share with Rick something that he would be interested in. So it's about building a trust bridge, as I call it.
Mm-hmm.
Once the bridge is built, and it gets built because you're talking to people about what they care about.
Yep.
Once the bridge is built, everything else opens up for whatever your intended relationship may be. It's really not hard, but we've just put the pieces together and then made it easy to use the pieces with EngagePro, and it's making a huge difference. Typically, one should expect to get 6 to 10 new high-quality referred sales opportunities every month if they're doing this with a small group of people, 20 people. You don't need a database of 200 or 2,000. 20 people, if they know 20 people they can introduce you to, how do you get them to open up that cell phone, that digital Rolodex, and introduce you?
Yep.
Build trust intentionally. And so we've made it easy to make that happen. And people literally around the globe are enjoying the benefits of that.
Yeah, and please, if I'm off base, correct me. But two of the things that I saw in there that are important in my world, one is I often get to deal with fairly complex products or services that we're working with, and the potential client is interested, but part of my job is to help educate them about how this applies in business, how it might fit in their world, how their peers in other parts of the country or the world are using this kind of thing. And your platform would make it easy for me to educate people on things that they're interested in as they become available, either as we create them or we see other people using them. You're creating a platform that makes that communication simple.
Yeah, and there's nothing to correct you on. But the first thing that has to happen is you have to open their ears to being open to talking about those complicated solutions. When in fact, for everyone, the very first step in any marketing process, and I want to say sales process too, is lowering the personal stress between the two parties to the point where you can get into discovery and needs assessment.
Yep.
Okay. If you don't create the bridge of trust, comfort, acceptance, openness, willingness, if you don't create that, you do not have the foundation to get into constructive uncovering of needs and whether or not you have a solution to match that need that solves the problem, whether it's an important problem.
And the other thing I would guess EngagePro helps with, the research is telling us today that in B2B, the B2B world, you're probably dealing with about 7 different decision makers inside any transaction. And some of those decision makers are procurement and compliance and data security, and who probably don't care a thing about why you're there to talk to them, but they're part of the decision-making process because it is important. And I'm guessing EngagePro would help me build that kind of trust and relationship with 6 or 7 or 8 people easier than the way we've been doing it for the last 30 years.
Well, having been in professional sales for a good long while, I know that when you sit around a conference room table with all of those different role players in seats, you have got to find out what it is that's important to them and bring them over to a place of either support or deciding not to be a wall or a barricade.
Yep.
Okay. And you have to do that by understanding who they are. Yes. And empowering them on the terms that they operate, using the yardsticks that they work with. And you know, I was speaking with a woman yesterday who sells HR benefit advisory services, and we're having a heart to heart. And I said, well, let me tell you what I think your problem is. You're selling at the wrong point in the organization. You're trying to go into the organization with a great solution, but the HR director is the person you're talking with. And you represent work to them. Yep. Now, what you need to do is look at who all the players would be if they were sitting at a table with you and speak to each of them from their point of need. Yep. And that includes the decision maker, because the HR director is a blocker, not a supporter, until you make her a supporter or him a supporter. And it's just the dynamic of selling a complex application into a diverse organization. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah, well, that's why I wanted to make sure we talked about EngagePro, because my experience with it is it makes that hard job of developing the relationship and honoring the people you're talking to much simpler and easier than it was, you know, just a few years ago.
Yeah, I'll say one final thing, or maybe it won't be final, but one thing to focus in on, the name of the product, EngagePro. There has been longitudinal research, which you likely understand means year after year, the research of professional service providers that has proven that if you as the provider have a highly engaged relationship with your clients and prospects on a personal level. I don't mean inappropriate personal. Let's be real. It's about the interests of the other person. There is a 100% incidence of that highly engaged relationship referring you to the people in their Rolodex. Anything less than highly engaged. Now, this is where it gets binary. Anything less than highly engaged. That means contact once every 2 to 3 weeks, by the way. That's what high engagement means. The incidence of introducing that professional to someone you know falls to from 100 down to 7%. And that happens year after year after year. So EngagePro, I've put a little 3-minute video together showing this, but EngagePro hones in on once every 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to tell you it's time to talk to Rick. Now talk to him about his fishing trip to Utah.
Yep.
Here's the best hiking trails in southern Idaho. Going on vacation to Hilton Head. Stop at this restaurant for black and redfish right over the river on the left. Hudson's. I forgot the name for a minute.
Yep.
That's what EngagePro tells you to do.
Well, thank you for confirming and adding some additional knowledge on that, because I'm still a really big fan. So the last one for curiosity, and then I've got one other question, but you have to tell me about the 6-step sales ladder.
Yes. Well, you and I have both been through years of sales and sales training and every system in the world.
Yep.
And most people haven't been through any sales training. Okay, well, there's a place to start. So the 6-step sales ladder is a very simple sales training model that says there are 6 steps that you need to follow, that if you learn what these 6 steps are and follow them, you're going to get to the top of the ladder where the closing or the contract or the completed sale is. If you miss any step on the ladder on the way up, you're going to fall just like you would on a ladder and be flat on your back at the bottom and have to start over.
Yeah.
Now, frankly, the sale is closed about step 4 or 5 if you're doing the activities right. The 6th step is really the formalities of how do we begin. However, first step has to be setting your upfront agreements in place as to why you're getting together. Step number 2 is building the trust. Step number 3 is uncovering and defining the needs. Step number 4 is finding the emotional needs, because people buy for emotions, and then overlaying into that. I've had a lot of fun training Sandler sales trainers on this process, by the way. It's been beautiful. I've got lots of Sandler friends, but moving on, step 5 and step 6 are, once you identify the emotional needs and solve them in step 5, step 6 is there's no closing needed. It's like you've already answered all the objections before you ever got to the so-called closing table.
I worked for a very large software company many years ago, and they brought in some sales trainer who was the buddy of the VP, and he had like 5 pages of things you had to do, and on page 4 was the emotional decision to buy. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's the only decision that matters. When they make the emotional decision to buy, this is over.
Exactly. So what you don't get to the emotional need unless you first get to the relationship.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let you inside the inner sanctum until I know I can trust you. When I can trust you, we can really open up this thing and talk about it and whether it's a worthwhile problem to solve.
So, Tom, we could probably spend another 2 hours doing this, but I'm going to ask you two last questions. The first one is for new people in the industry, and by the industry I mean they're coming in as entrepreneurs or new employees in an organization. What advice do you have for them? And then the second part of that question is the leaders of those organizations. What wisdom do you want to pass to that group in today's world? Those are the first question, two parts.
Well, there's so many ways to answer it. For the new person coming in, they have to have their mind open to understand, to learning about and understanding how the culture works, and to be a contributing part of the community or the team. They've got to join in the process. And I have a document over here I'm going to be delivering to a group in about 2 weeks. And these are to a group of leaders. And it's a little caricature that says on the caricature, be sure you find out the last names of the people who you're responsible for leading. And if you just think about what that implies. Now, if you're a new person, start at who the other person is and learn to understand them. You will build alliances, you'll build advocates, and you'll find doors open and communication flow. Now, the recommendation for a leader is practically the same. Open the door to your office and invite somebody in and just get to know them. Just, literally have them sit down and take off the stripes on your sleeves.
Yeah.
And get to know people. And you're going to scare the dickens out of some people at the very beginning because it's the way our cultures have formed. But I can tell you, the more you do that, a little bit of time, I'm a big fan of John King's tribal leadership model, where when you get to level 4 and level 5 leadership, it's one for all and all for one.
Yeah.
And that's how you get there with that type of open door, open communications. And we could talk for 2 more hours. I'll never forget my first boss again. I made a terrible screw up. And I went in and told him about my terrible screw up. It cost my company about 40 grand. And I said, well, I have to tell you, I screwed up. And he looked across this big mahogany table at me on the 17th floor of this high rise. And he said, Tom, there's one thing I like about you. You're the only person on my team I know who will admit their mistakes. And for that, I appreciate you. So I trust that I'd be safe in admitting my mistake. And then at the end of it, he said, now don't go do it again. But the whole point is that level of trust, because we're all going to make mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
Forget the circumstances. But, if you never make a mistake, you're never going to go anywhere in the first place.
But the mistake will show up whether you bring it up or not. Eventually it's going to show up. Might as well show up sooner as opposed to later.
Yeah. Well, I agree. And might as well turn something into a lesson versus let it be a fault.
So here's my last question for you. What would you like to share with us, just for the last thing of the day? What would you like us to leave with on our mind?
Well, I think if I reflect on that white paper I mentioned earlier, talking about the great relationship reset, I think I can speak to all the business topics that you may want to, but I want to speak to you, the head of your family, you, the mother, you, the father, you, the son or daughter. Put that darn cell phone down and start talking to each other. Okay. That relationship reset has to be a counterbalance to the technology reset that we've been dwarfed by. And your life will improve, your business will improve, your family conditions will improve. You know, at my late stage, middle age, whatever I call myself, I think the biggest impact I could make at this point is getting people to talk to each other again. And all the good that can come from that is far bigger than any value out of going online and getting another post out to Facebook or whatever it is that I'm working on. So I love it that I'm able to bring these principles to the business world and create a business that impacts people, to help them create a business. And at the same time, impacting a life in a community is a far more significant outcome than you know, just the business outcome.
What a perfect final word for a podcast on living a revenue culture. So
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun, Rick.
It has been fun, and I could say we could do two. I may ask you back again, because we could cover some other topics that I think are highly valuable. So I appreciate this very much. Thank you for being here today.
No, thank you. You honored me by inviting me, so thank you.
And for the rest of you, hopefully you've had as much fun with this and learned as much as I did. And 2 weeks from now, we'll have another one. And you can find us, as you know, on all the places podcast lists and on our website. And it's both in audio and video. So thank you for joining us today.